Hello, everyone. We're going to try another one of these Lakin Learns Leela streams. And today I've messed a little bit with my audio settings, and I'm hoping that means that my video and audio are less out of sync. So if someone could give me a little bit of feedback on that, that'd be great. Apparently, I find that incredibly difficult to check when I just record myself and listen to myself a few times over and over again, mostly because I get super embarrassed when I listen to myself, so it's hard to actually figure it out. Still a small lag. Okay, I'll up it more for next stream then. Although maybe I can actually do it right now. Let's see whether this actually works. Close. Maybe that's better. We'll do it live. That's right. That's the motto of this stream so far. Is we're gonna do it live. So far, I haven't tested everything that I'm going to do on any of these streams particularly well beforehand. So, in some cases, I think that'll be kind of what we do. I'm going to not jump right into it here for a few minutes. I'm going to sort of let the other people show up. I don't know if we've put link to the stream or said anything on the how to set up Leela Discord, but we may want to do that. Just to make sure that we are all on the same page and that everybody has a chance to join. Is what a Bill O'Reilly quote? We'll do it live? I have no idea. That's popular culture, and I'm not very popular and don't have any culture, so... Whoops. Not sure what I did. I'm going to try not to moderate the stream while live. I'll leave that to the experts. I think I just messed up something with what Gilbert was trying to say. Yeah, I think I just timed out Gilbert. Sorry, Gilbert. Wasn't my intent. I'll wait for maybe a minute or two, and then I'll jump right in, just to make sure that we have enough time for a few people to start. Only 15 people showing up so far. I guess the second stream isn't going to be as popular as the first one, maybe. I don't know. We'll see. That's okay with me, honestly. That means the 15 people get more attention. Awesome. So I suppose I should actually try and talk a fair bit while we're waiting anyways. I'm going to... it's not exactly my strongest suit. I tend to be the silent type, except when I make childish jokes. Then I have lots of time for childish jokes. I'll try and keep most of those off of the stream today. But we'll see. Strong and silent. Don't know about how strong I am, but silent for sure. Strength is one of those things that I'm working on. I'm stubborn, if that counts. I can be very, very, very stubborn about things, as SP found out regarding my desire to type correctly with correct grammar. Winnie the Pooh asks, how can I help Lichess development? It's a good question, Winnie. There is a lot of things you can do. If you are a developer, then you can help out by setting up the development environment, which is what I'm talking about a little bit today. And then you can find some issues that you can do, and you can do those issues. If you are a user, then you can always help with things like by watching the issues. And if people report bugs and we're having trouble reproducing them, you can always try and reproduce them yourself. And if you can reproduce them, then you can describe to us how you can reproduce them so that we can figure it out how to fix it. You can always provide feedback and on tested features. So Thibaut will also often ask for feedback on early features, and providing feedback and testing that will be good. Thibaut streams on regular basis as well on Twitch, although he does it on his own account, which is, I think, Ornicar2 on Twitch, and he streams regularly. And when he's streaming, sometimes he needs people to test stuff. Like when he did the V2 UE, he had a small little army of people that were testing things for him. So there's lots of different ways you can help out. Molokai asks, is there a way to change the analyze engine to the latest? We are working on getting the latest Stockfish working on Lichess, but there are some challenges there. So the latest Stockfish runs on a neural network, which has been adapted to run well and fast on a CPU as opposed to on a graphics card. So it's still fully CPU, but it runs on a neural network. And interestingly enough, that the CPU level operations that it uses don't work well in WebASM. So WebASM is the technology we use to run that. So they don't run very well right there, so there's some challenges to get to run it. We can get it running, but it runs really poorly. It's much weaker, as far as I know. It's much weaker than the previous version. So from that perspective, it's not worth us to upgrade that until we're able to fix it, and we may not be able to fully fix it until new versions of WebASM come out. So we're not sure. Okay, I'm going to get started here, I think. We have enough time for people to start. This is my attempt to sort of give you a little bit of a plan of what we're going to do. So last time we actually started and did all of this stuff here. So we did a various tour of all the different repos. We talked about that. If you haven't seen that video, you can find it on our Lichess YouTube. And then we went through and set up a development environment using Vagrant and got it all working so that we were able to compile and run the code. Today, I don't have quite as concrete of a plan, but if you look at the right-hand side of this, I do plan on talking a little bit about development workflow and how you can sort of use the various commands that we provide to actually work on Leela. And that'll include a number of different things like the UE build command, what it does, what it accomplishes, the ability of being able to build individual UE projects with Gulp, using SBT, some of the commands you can use there. We'll talk a little bit about, and I'm actually going to try and set up, this is what I was talking about in terms of we'll do it live. I'm going to try and set up a Bloop install on my local machine so that you can actually get IDE-like features from your editor. And then we'll talk about the various editors that are used a little bit, probably not too much there. And then we'll talk about, just go through some Scala and some good resources for Scala and how you can do some things there. After that, I'm going to actually go through the organization of the Leela code base a little bit. It's not going to be a complete review of it. It'll be, I don't know, sort of a high-level review. So if you're someone who's never worked on it before, you'll probably benefit from this. If you've worked on it and you know your way around, then this might be a little bit of a review for you. I'll also admit that I'm not what's the word I'm looking for here? I'm not deeply familiar with the entire code base as I could be, mostly just because I've not been able to have as much time to review it in the past, say, 6 to 8 months as I'd hoped I would. So from that perspective, this will be a little bit more of a superficial review of how it works than, say, someone like a Thibaut or Nicholas could give you. ICP 1994. ICP 1994 asks a question, which is there a fraction of Leela I can build for contribution instead of the whole thing? I only have an old laptop. As of right now, that's a little bit difficult in terms of building a full Leela. It's, as far as I know, you can't, for the Scala build, you can't partially build it. It's a monolithic sort of single process that runs the entire thing. Running it's actually not that hard, but building it's a little bit harder. You could potentially try some other things. For example, you could potentially look at the build artifacts that happen on our GitHub in the continuous integration side of it and find those build artifacts for different versions and download those and try and just run those directly. That I'm not going to go over how to do that. That's something that takes a little bit of work and effort. But if you did that, then you feasibly could work on, say, the front end, the UE and JavaScript and TypeScript and CSS stuff. And that stuff doesn't require nearly as much power from your laptop. So you could contribute that way. I won't say that I think that's a particularly great way of developing on it, because there's probably a lot of little things you have to get right in terms of how to get it all set up. So from that perspective, it might be a lot more difficult to set up than the normal way. But if it's your only way and you're interested in helping, then that's for sure. And Lucas points out that I'm wearing the same hoodie. I am wearing the same hoodie as last time, and there's a reason for that. It's my Lichess hoodie. It has the Lichess Knight on it. So it's my only Lichess hoodie, so figured I'd wear it while I'm doing the stream. May as well, right? Gotta rep the merchandise that we sell. So, and if you guys didn't know we had merchandise, we do. I don't have the link handy. Someone else can link that if you want. Okay. So, without further ado, let's jump into something that I'm planning on covering today. So, if we go back to this, the wiki. Last time we spent a fair bit of time in this Lichess development onboarding page, and you mean you were in the same one there now? Ah, cool, nice. What, do you want to join the stream and get on camera and show it off? Someone mod Gilbert already. Anyways, we're going to be spending some time here in Lichess development onboarding wiki, but this time we're going to assume that you've already followed the last video. So if you recall from the last video, and the last video is actually here, you can find it here. If you follow the last video, then you've already gone through all of these steps. You've already installed the dependencies, including the infrastructure, MongoDB and Redis, and then you've gone through and gotten the copy of Leela, and you've gotten a copy of Leela WS, and you're able to run both of those and connect to them and play games and do development work like that. So from that perspective, that's where we're assuming you start with this stream. And sorry, I lost my train of thought there, which is going to be pretty normal considering how tired I am today. So that's where we're assuming you're going to start from. And what I'm going to actually talk about today to start with is I'm going to go all the way down here, and we're going to talk about this particular thing. And the reason we're going to talk about this particular thing is because this is actually, in my opinion, super important to get set up in your coding environment. If you're coding on Leela and you're coding with Scala in general, or any modern language that's a combination of very type-safe, like Rust and Scala and C++, but also that is very not verbose, so that you can write terse code like Scala and Rust. And I won't include C++ in that, despite my differing opinions on that subject. But when you look at Leela code, for example, oftentimes you don't see a lot of type information written there. And so sometimes it can actually be a little bit difficult to follow exactly what's going on, to understand exactly where everything comes from. Scala has these implicit dependencies and all sorts of different things that you can do, and it has dependency injection and all these sorts of things that are really nice as a developer, but when you're coming into a new code base and you're reading it can be a little bit overwhelming and hard to understand. And if you set this up, then you will be able to get some really nice features from your editor. So let's quickly switch over to Bloop and talk about what Bloop is, because Bloop is one thing we're going to be using. So Bloop is a compile server for Scala that works with SPT and has support for other build tools. We're not going to use other build tools, though it doesn't matter. But the idea here is this compile server basically means that it actually will do the compilation for you, and while it's doing that compilation, not only does it compile all of your code, the other thing that it does is it actually indexes your code, so it actually understands where all the source code is and the dependencies and stuff like that. And so it can provide some really nice features, like you can click on a particular symbol and you can get taken immediately to where that symbol is defined. So if you're not sure where this particular type is coming from, you click on it, it'll open that file directly for you. You don't have to search for it, which is super nice. It'll also give you live documentation. For example, if I scroll down, actually 2 seconds here, I'm going to actually click on this first. So this is Tebow's setup, and if you scroll down here, you'll notice that on this part of the page right here, and it may be hard to read on this particular resolution, but if you go to the page yourself, you can see it. You'll notice that he's hovering over bind from request, and he's able to quickly pull up the documentation for bind from request, which tells you exactly what's going on here. It gives you the types and all this sorts of other information, which is very important for a smooth development workflow. So that's why we're interested in this. And Bloop is the first piece of what gives you that. The second piece of what gives you that is called Metals. And Metals is a Scala language server with rich IDE features. So it's a combination of Bloop and Metals that gives you this sort of thing. And so we're going to try and set both of those things up today. So I've actually done some pre-configuration here. So I'm on Arch Linux. I'm not actually going to use Vagrant this time because it's actually a little bit harder to get it set up on Vagrant. And it is possible to get it set up on Vagrant, but you'll have to do some fiddly type stuff. to make sure that your editor can edit the code and still talk to the Bloop server. So from that perspective, this is, I think, going to assume that you have this set up locally somehow. I'm also not going to go through, so I'm on Arch Linux, but I'm not going to go through how to set up the specific details for Arch, because I don't think those are important either. If you have questions about those, feel free to ask me and I'll try and answer them, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on those because you're probably not on Arch, or and if you are, you know how to do it. But the first thing here is that I've installed Bloop, so I have a version of Bloop installed, and I've also installed something called Code. Oops, that's going to get me a lot of results here, so, but where did it go? This one here. This is the one I'm installing, Community Code. And what that one is let's go back to here. This is a copy of Visual Studio Code, which is an editor that's free to use. And there are a few different versions of it available on Arch. One of the versions available on Arch is this open source release, which is the one called Code. You can also download the fully Microsoft branded release with Visual Studio Code-bin, but I'm going to skip that today. And Ubuntu Linux, yeah, a lot of people use Ubuntu Linux, and that should work fine. Any Debian-based distribution should probably work fine. But I'm not going to cover those specifics today. So I've already got, and I'll show you really quickly, I've already got Visual Studio Code downloaded, and it's over here. And if you just download and install Visual Studio Code by itself, and you open up the Lila folder, and then you say find some piece of one of the files, and you open it up, you'll notice a few things here first. And the few things you'll notice is that there's no syntax highlighting first, because by default, Scala, it doesn't come with Scala syntax highlighting. So what you can do is click on this extensions button here, and search for Scala, and we'll install the Scala syntax plugin, which is the very first one here. And that means when we go back, open the account, now we have syntax highlights. At the very least, this is better than we had before. But it's no, it doesn't support every language by default. It depends a lot on its plugins, which is the same as Vim, and I think that's actually a better way to distribute code editors, is to distribute them as sort of a thin shell that provides you with the base features, and then provides ways to use plugins to get those features out of it. Because if you try and support it by default and sort of build it in, then you have to keep up with every possible thing. Whereas this allows a lot of interesting innovation in the code editor and IDE space, because there's a lot of people out there who will say, I have a really cool idea for something I want implemented in my IDE, and they'll implement it as a plugin, and now it actually allows you to work better this way. Okay, the other thing you'll notice is that there's this Scala Metals thing, which is that thing I was talking about. So this is the Scala language server, and that's the other term that I wanted to quickly talk about, is language server. So, did I have that somewhere? Nope. Visual language servers. Let's Google really quickly. So language servers are basically this idea that rather than, same thing I was just talking about, rather than building all of your IDE features directly into your editor, what you actually do is you build a language server, and that language server can know everything it needs to know about that language, and it exposes that information via some protocol that's called the language server protocol. And that language server protocol, hello. Linter is interesting because it's like a linter, but it's actually more like a full IDE feature, which includes linting. It also includes full compilation warnings. It also includes full IDE features like autocomplete, documentation pulling up, go-to definition, find all callers of a particular method, find all, things like that. So it allows you to navigate your source code and understand your source code directly inside your editor a little bit easier. And the thing that provides that is this language server protocol concept. I'm not going to go into a bunch of detail here, but it's really cool that this was, Microsoft actually is the one who created them, and I'll give them created these, and I'll give them kudos for that. This has actually sort of redefined the IDE landscape. So now I can use the same language server, which is Metals and Bloop, and I can use it in Vim. And because Vim's my preferred editor, that's where I get it, and I get those same features inside of Vim. But someone else who doesn't want to learn Vim, or wants to use Emacs, like say, the 5 people in the world who use Emacs, including Lucas, they can also get the same features from it. Although Emacs probably has something completely built in. Rapinello, that's probably better to do that on the Discord as opposed to here. So I'll let you. This is more about development of Lichess, and we're going to talk about development stuff. So I'm not going to handle bugs and things like that. So anyways, so that's what this is. It's a language server. So let's go back here and let's install this as well too. And once I install this, if I go back to here, it's going to complain because it can't connect with the build server. And the build server is actually Bloop. And that's the thing we're going to figure out how to set it up. But by default, and I'm actually going to do a couple of things here. You'll notice there's a .metals folder and a .bloop folder that already exists in my Lila. I'm actually going to remove those. So I'm going to close Visual. No, I'm not going to close Visual Studio Code. So .bloop. So we're going to just remove those. So we're going to start from scratch. Metals. Okay, and then I'm going to go back to here, go back to the plugin. I'm going to briefly uninstall this just so that I reload required, will reload. So we're starting from a little bit more of a base thing. Okay, now that we've talked about what these things are, let's go back to these instructions. So these instructions are more or less targeted at someone who's on. So a compiler, so ICP asks a good question that's probably worth me answering here first, but and that is a language. What's the difference between a language server? The language server protocol is a different thing, and the language server and the build and a compile server. So talk a little bit about that. So you have your editor over here, which might be Vim or VS Code or Atom or IntelliJ. And basically your language server, call it just LS, language server, sits over here. And it talks back and forth between these. And the language it speaks is a language server protocol. So the protocol is the language it actually speaks between them. And then over here is your build server. And so sometimes for some languages, these are the same thing. So you'll download one package and it does both for you. Sometimes they're separated out because it makes sense to separate them out. And the reason why it makes sense to separate them out is because these build servers can be reused in certain contexts. So if you've heard of continuous integration, if I spelled that correctly, this is a feature called, I'll usually abbreviate it as CI, that GitHub and other things use, which will build things for you based on different actions. So we have continuous integration set up so that when things are pushed to the Lila source code, it actually does some builds for us. So it actually tries to build the product and figure out whether or not it's currently building. And then it'll run some tests on it as well too. And the reason why you want that is because you want to make sure that any commit that you push is working properly in different environments. And so the build server is useful in that context. And we don't need the language server or the language server protocol for that because it's just doing a build. And so for a lot of large companies that have builds that are huge that take a long time, they'll have these build servers that you can, when you push code to, the build servers will actually do what they need to do to build it, to make a release for the product and stuff like that. And it's separated from your local machine. So yeah, so they're basically two different things. And the language, and when you have a nice build server, and Bloop's a great build server for Scala, when you have a good build server, it makes sense to sort of build the language server protocol in between it by itself. Oops. It's gonna happen a couple times today. Go back here. Too many keyboard shortcuts. Okay. So this, going back, someone else asked a question here. So someone makes a pull request. Does this language server also check the committed code? I had an experience with a language server called SonarQube that's set up for JS environment. So the language server, no. The language server just basically, like I said, is intended for communicating with your editor. And the build server is what actually does the building for committed code. So those two terms are different. So we've installed it with a package manager, and I'm actually going to not set up a systemd service for it. I'm just going to try running it directly myself. The systemd service is nice because if you, Thibaut has this map, so he can press like F1, I think it is. I forget which key it is for him, but he has it built up so he can restart the build server really quickly, which sometimes is required when you need to make sure it recompiles from scratch or something like that. So he has various things set up with this and uses a systemd service. I'm actually going to not bother with that particular setup. So going back to my keyboard, foo today is not as strong as it is normally due to my lack of sleep. Oh yeah, it is F1. He actually shows you here. So a couple of things you need to do, which I'm going to do here, is you have to run this command here, spt bloop install. So run that here, or install bloop. So Rapanello asked if Leela is completely programmed in Python, and the answer is definitely not. That did not work at all. How come? Let's try this. This is why you don't do things live on stream. Oops. Just let me think about this for a few seconds. Maybe bloop needs to be installed. No. Let's go back to here. Let's do spt clean. Make sure I have the latest version of the code. Also, what? Java 1.8. That's not good. So we're gonna, I think I forgot to do this stuff. So let's make sure I have the right version of Java again. So we'll install 14, not 15. Java install this. And yeah, I know. It's amateur hour over here, something pretentious. So my local dev environment on this machine is not quite as up to date as I had previously, so I'm going to try and get that up to date. So you are getting a little bit of the last version, the last video. And the reason why Scala was chosen is because it's functional. It allows Thibault to use immutable concepts, so he can make it a functional program with complete immutability. And it's on top of the JVM, and the JVM is very good at creating and destroying a lot of small objects, which is what functional programming typically results in. And so that result means that from a practical perspective, this allows Thibault to be productive and provides a battle-tested, efficient runtime in production. And Yearstem asks, what language framework do you prefer? Is Scala your favorite? Interestingly enough, I don't currently have a favorite. Had you asked me this question 6 years ago, it would have been Python for sure. And Django. I would not say the same answer right now because I've found that I actually quite like a lot of different languages. I'd say, and the other thing is, I find the question of, and I'm not trying to put down your question, it's a great question, thank you for asking it, but I find the question of what's your favorite to be difficult to answer. I find a better question to answer is what language, like you can ask various versions of that question, like what language are you using the most right now? That's an interesting question. Or what language are you most excited about right now in terms of like what you think is the most interesting? And so for me, the language I use the most right now is Python and C++, because I do Python for work, I do C++ for school, and the language I'm most excited about right now is Rust. So ICP 1994 is correct. Rust is the language that I am most excited about. And someone else asked if we work with Node.js, and yes, I do teach C++. And have you worked with Node.js? I have worked with Node.js. I don't think it's more suitable, no. It is a great networking backend type thing. So from that perspective, I think it's a great language. I don't think that would be a particularly bad choice, but it's an interpreted language, which means that from a certain perspective, it's going to be slower than a lot of different things. It's going to be slower than a native language like Scala, for example. Just let me look here. It's bloop install. That's what I thought. So I'm going to go here really quickly. And I'm going to... Can I edit this page? No, I can't. Someone needs to edit this page. It's bloop install. So anyway, so going back to the Node.js question. So this is the command we need to run. Yay, now it's actually going to run. And going back to Node.js, so if you really want high level performance, I think Scala and Rust are actually a better choice for that. And if you want a certain level of productivity from a developer, I think that Rust and Scala are both good choices for that, although Scala is probably slightly easier to be more productive in because it automatically takes care of a few things for you. As a result, though, in certain situations, it might be slightly slower than, say, like a Rust, where you're forced to take care of those yourself. Again, that depends on your skill as a programmer, because if you are forced to take care of those yourself and you do a poor job of that, then it probably won't be as fast as Scala doing it automatically for you. Me, personally, I did not get the notification in terms of being a Tier 1 subscription. We definitely thank you for subscribing. Appreciate it. But at the same time as well, too, if you really want to support Lichess, it's slightly better for us if you support the patron page. But honestly, support us however you want. So Twitch works as well, too. We're happy to be here. And also, if you don't worry about supporting us if you either are short on cash or short on money, or just don't feel like it, that's fine too. Tavosky says he edited the wiki. Look at that. It's fixed. Yay, open source. In action. Can I me your emog? No, I can't me your emog. Not that I have any idea what that means. Okay, so once you have bloop installed and set up, you can run commands like this, bloop compile lila. Let's see here, what's going on? I think my fish auto completions were not working. Failed to compile coordinate video and 69 unexpected error forces client exit number format exception. What? Come on. You can do this, bloop. There we go. My emoji. I'm not sure which emoji you're talking about. MG rookie on move. Yeah, of course you can. I learned Python first before I learned Scala. So, and there to be clear as well too, there are apps in the Lichess ecosystem which use Python. So there's Fishnet, which is a nice little app that uses Python. And Something Pretentious has written us some code that uses Python, although I don't know if it's public. But for example, I think the one that is public is the app that does the patron verification on Discord is public, and Something Pretentious did it. So MongoTopia is public. Great. I'm not sure why it didn't work the first time, to be quite honest with you. ICP 1994. Yeah, I couldn't answer that question for you. It's working now, and I'm happy to see it working. So, just going to take you through all these commands and run them each one. Just so that just to try it all out here. Oh, I understand, Gallery Subwatcher. You subbed. So yeah, it apparently doesn't like one of the... Let's just try SBT by itself. And try compiling from here and see what it does. because maybe the current state of master is not compiling, which is something I covered last time, but I will cover again today. And someone asked, what about the front end of Lichess? Is it made using a certain library/framework? So it kind of is, but it's probably not the answer you expect. It's not using the typical big three or whatever, which is Angular, React, or Vue specifically. It's those are a bit too heavy, and Thibaut specifically, and Nicholas as well. Both of them are capable of rebuilding the basic facilities that React gives you and rebuilding it in a way that allows them to make it more efficient for Lichess. So we actually use, but we do use the virtual DOM library that Vue uses, which is called SnapDOM. And while this is compiling, I'll show you what that is. It's SnapDOM. So SnapDOM is a virtual DOM library. And this allows us to do similar things to what React does and Vue does in terms of basically saying, here's a virtual DOM, and it will automatically diff that with the current DOM and then inject in just the pieces that have changed, which allows us to do that sort of data-driven reactive type programming, which is that paradigm is used on Lichess. It's just not used directly with a framework called like React. And what am I aiming to do for Lichess right now? Honestly, my primary goal for Lichess is to try and grow the developer community right now. So I'd like to see more developers be involved doing small things. And this stream and the last stream was a big part of the reason what I'm doing for that. Just because I want to make sure that Lichess has, Thibaut has help. He's a fantastic developer, very productive, but Lichess is large enough now that trying to just 100%. Okay, can't start the server, and this is because, yeah, I forgot to start not Postgres, Redis, and MongoDB. So now those should be started. Let's run again. So that's my primary goal. After that, I'd like to become a little bit more involved in some of the... So it still doesn't like Mongo. So let's the status of MongoDB. My Mongo is not running right now. So we'll fix that on stream. Oh, I know what it is. I have a Vagrant running in the background that is using that port. So MongoDB can't actually start up. So I'm seeing something about snail gun here, but I didn't see. Just trying to make sure I catch up on these questions. The database we use for game state is MongoDB, correct? So let's try starting MongoDB again. No. So what is Mongo doing? Does not halt properly? No, this is halted. It should tell me I can't connect to it. Correct. Okay, that's fine. So stop MongoDB. Start MongoDB. Status. Still nothing. sysadmin is coming in to the rescue here with a suggested command. No, it doesn't like something. Let's just look through these logs here really quickly. Wrong MongoDB version, invalid feature compatibility, bad value, upgrade procedures. My guess is Mongo actually upgraded since the last time I ran it, and I have to do some specific things from Arch. So let's go figure those out on stream. Why not? So let's start with that. So no, not that one. So database location, 3 gigabytes of journal files. We do. Let's try that one. So lock files, no locks. Arch is hard to use, yes. This is a good reason why. Honestly, if I was using Ubuntu, this probably wouldn't actually be a problem. that. Okay, so MongoDB upgrade procedures then. Let's go look at the official ones. Feature compatibility and upgrade procedures. Honestly, I wonder if I can just blow away the database. Because I do not care about that database whatsoever. Maybe Lucas can help me out with this one. For 4.2. So I would suggest A, revert to the other release. B, connect to Mongo. I can't connect to Mongo. It's not running, Lucas. Yeah, removed RS everything. We're in the data directory there. That's where I need to do that. Yeah, that's always safe. This is always safe. Let's teach a generation of people that remove -rf. This is a good idea. Oh, come on. Okay. Yay, it's running. Look at this. So great. Oh, and just doing it live is the best thing ever. Doesn't work, delete everything. Yeah. If it doesn't work, change it all to be 777. That's the PHP way, right? 777. Including all your things, and make sure that your PHP can write files to your local PHP directory. Oops, I already did that. So SBT. Let's try running Lichess one more time. I was worried the stream wouldn't take very long, but if I keep running into MongoDB errors, it'll be a very long stream. One more time with this. See whether this works this time or not. Hello, everyone. Any other questions while this is all running? Oh, look, it's running now. Yay. host 9663. And there we go. We have Lichess running, which is awesome. Okay, so going back to here, we'll go here, and I'm going to look at the Lichess onboarding thing again. Bloop run Lila-M. This is how you run it. So let's try this. Whoa. My fish editor does not like bloop auto complete for some reason, and I don't know why. Which is pretty awesome. So we'll have to look into that at some point. There we go. So supposedly this will run bloop in a server form, and you can run this in different ways. Let it go, and wow, it does not like this again because Java bind exception address already in use. Let's try that one. Yeah, this is exactly what software development is like. Doing things you think should work, having them not work, being very frustrated, Googling things, spending time reading a bunch of Stack Overflow. Okay, so ostensibly this is working now, again, running via bloop. So I go back here, I load this. It should load again, great. And then let's go to here, interestingly enough. So going back to the extensions, let's install metals again, Scala metals, install that one. And let's go back to the project. And failed to connect to the build server. See logs for more details. So let's go into the logs. Where would I see the logs? And I'm sure you guys can see this text that I'm looking at right now. Search for logs. No, that's just searching inside of the actual project, so that's not it. So manage extension, debuggers. Where would I see the logs in Visual Studio Code? Is it Control-Shift-P? Someone says that. Show logs. Extension host. This thing. This does not look relevant. Debug console, nope. So close that. Control-Shift-P, logs. Extensions log folder, let's do that. That opened it somewhere that you guys can't see, which is fine. No functionality will work. Cannot run program home vagrant, pin Java in directory, set up no such file or directory. Is somehow this. Oh, interesting. Why would it be running vagrant? So I think this might be a problem with it trying to log things to vagrant, which is weird. I don't think that's actually the right one. Let's shift P, open developer log directory. Do this again. Okay, that's an older one. That was not the right one. So this looks a little bit more... No, it's still complaining about this. So why would it not? Oh, am I open? Do I have the wrong... I have the wrong directory open. Haha. Okay. Let's go back to here. Can we close stuff? Open file, open folder, Lichess, Lila. There we go. This is the folder we want. And metals. Let's see whether or not it figures this out for me. Import the build. Yep, okay, now we're going. Now we're talking. Again, I'll blame this on the lack of sleep. Java 14 is end of life jammer. Oh, wow, well, we'll have to upgrade. That's alright though, we have some time. Import build. So it's going to do the building, do the importing. Gonna do some things. You guys get to listen to me blather on about how I don't know how to do half this stuff anymore. Gonna scroll back through some questions, make sure I'm not missing everything. The grin of pure satisfaction, exactly. The grin of I figured it out live. How hard could this possibly be? I think it's interesting, as a sort of side note, one of the reasons why I've been doing this sort of live is, well, the first, then probably the biggest reason is I'm lazy and didn't do any preparation, so we'll start with that. The second reason why I'm doing it live, though, the reason why I tell myself that this is important is because Lila has been hard for some people to set up in the past. We get a lot of questions about it. And so this is a way of sort of forcing myself to go through the process. That way I can do it on stream. People can see me struggle with it. They can see the way I'm learning how to do it, the way I have to Google things, and how you can actually possibly get through all this. So apparently the indexing is complete down here, which is great. So if I go back to my files, and I go to, say, app here, and I open some controller, account Scala, preparing compilation, great. I should be able to go to definition. What? No definition found for auth. No, this should be working. Oh, it's still compiling stuff down here. Wait till compilation is finished and try again, I see. I gotta wait for all the compilation to finish, so it actually hasn't finished indexing yet. So we'll wait for a few more minutes here. Yeah, so anyway, so going through this and forcing myself to figure it out allows me to run into problems and makes me a little bit more empathetic when people come in and say, I can't figure it out. I can be like, yeah, I understand. This is something I went through as well, too. So, and also it's useful in terms of just being a resource for people to figure out how to do these sorts of things as well, too. So we're going to have to wait for a little while this compilation goes. Hello, Agmadi. And it takes a little while, but it's not too bad. It is incrementally compiled. So from that perspective, once the first compile is done, it doesn't take nearly as long. But on the other hand, on this machine, I haven't opened Lila in some other time. I've been developing on my laptop for Lila for the most part. So from that perspective, it's been a little while. So it's having to, and I also ran that SBT clean, which just cleaned everything out, which is useful to do when you haven't compiled in a while. Plus the font, which one? Here. How big do you want it? That better? Seems pretty giant. Okay. Good. Oh, is this done now? Can I right click on it? I can't plus the menu font. Sorry about that. Go to definition. Yay, I got to definition. So the reason why we did this is for things like that. So we open account, we're in here, we're looking at things, we're saying, oh, there's this auth thing that I don't understand, right? So like first off, I can hover over it, it tells me some information about it. I can see that auth is something which takes a function. And that function is first parameter is context, and then it return context, which will then return a user. Another function which takes a user to Leela, results, yada yada yada, and returns an action. So this is where you start to learn that this is where running Leela without making any changes to the code new directory is called BSP, called SPS adjacent. Should this be in git.ignore? Possibly should be in git.ignore. Feel free to make a pull request to add it there. If it is, I haven't been paying attention to what should be and should not be in git.ignore. So anyway, so now we have a lot of features which help us understand how to help us browse the code. So that's sort of an interesting thing that I want to get set up. And that's the basics of how to set up Bloop. If you recall, I'm actually running it over here manually with this giant command. If we go back here, that's one way of doing it. If you are using this method, it's probably better to sort of set something up like this so that you can restart it quickly and work on it very quickly. And yeah, so that's the basics of how to get Bloop set up. And you can also use Bloop for the other projects that we use in Lichess, such as Scala Chess, Leela WS, and Leela Fishnet, and just about any Scala project. So from that perspective, and there's also apparently a known issue with a task here. If someone wants a task, apparently when you edit the conf/routes, it doesn't automatically figure it out and recompile it. But I'm not going to go into that too much today. Okay. So that's the setup of Bloop. Anybody have any questions about that before I move on for a little bit? Somebody not on Twitch is asking what brand and model of keyboard I'm using. I am using a Poker 3, which is spelled POK 3R, in case you want it to be cool. And it has Cherry MX Brown switches in it, and it has some custom keycaps. Velocilobster is asking whether or not this will be saved in Twitch videos for those of us who can't watch right now but would like to watch when we have time. Yes, it will be, and it will also be uploaded to YouTube. And this time I'm remembering to actually record it, so we'll have 2 copies. Yay! Any questions on this Bloop setup thing here? Just going to wait for a few more minutes, not necessarily minutes, but a few more seconds here to make sure no one has any specific questions. If they don't, then I will move on to some of the other stuff I plan to cover today. And it doesn't look like anybody has any questions. So let me actually do something here. See if I can make a change here that makes sense. Where would I do that? Views, base, layout. I can't edit the code using that. Sorry, this is too big for me to edit code. I'm going to have to remove it down 1. Sorry, ICP. You'll have to deal with slightly smaller code. Otherwise, my screen is just impossible. Let's do a search, dark board. And let's look at this here. So right now, if I go to here and reload this really quickly, get the whiteboard, and let's just quickly make a change that would never be actually accepted. Make this not equals, save that. Going back here, ostensibly this should recompile. Actually, this is one thing that I think is kind of interesting about Bloop. So I'm not sure that it recompiles things really well. You might have to restart it more often. Which is one thing I don't love about Bloop. I think actually though, no, this is the thing, right? You can do SBT here, sorry, Leela here. And supposedly this will use the Bloop thing. So as I recall, you can run both of them at once. Maybe I'm wrong on that. run. And the run command. There is an auto reload ICP, and that's what I'm actually trying to get set up. I've used the auto reload before, and I want to make sure that's actually properly running. Okay, so that's actually running there. So tilde run is the SBT command for an auto reload run. So recursive randomness, it depends if the recursive randomness asks whether or not we have to write tests if we make a change. And the answer to that is, okay, so it looks like the address is already in use again. So that means that this one's running. So I'll have to figure out reload again. Running tests. So some of the software that we have has tests. For example, Scala Chess has tests. Hub. So I'm going to show you its tests just really quickly by going here and looking at this one. So Scala Chess has a bunch of tests, and I want changes. This is what I want. And so you'll notice that a little while ago we had a bug with castling in 960 front position, and Nicholas F. Committed this fix for it, and he actually added a new test for it in Scala Chess. So he actually was able to make a game board and make a test that exercised it and then fix it here. And so for some projects we do have a significant amount of tests, Scala Chess being one of them. For other projects and aspects of it, we don't have as many tests. For Lila itself, there is a small amount of tests there, but not a ton. So for that one specifically, you don't necessarily have to write a test to start off with, because we don't have a ton of tests for it, and testing stuff like that, sort of doing full integration testing is a bit more difficult. So from that perspective, those aren't required, and then I don't think our UE stuff either has tests. So from that perspective, I don't think they're required there either. I personally like to see tests when it's easy. So if you have easy tests, then it's easy to write a test for it. Then I prefer to see tests. But also, because Scala is a very strongly typed language, a strongly statically typed language, a lot of the testing that you might have done using Python or PHP or Ruby or things like that, which are not strongly statically typed, then from that are not as necessary. So you don't have to write quite as many tests from that perspective. You can actually make the types encode that kind of information. So from that perspective, I forget who says this, but I'm not sure. Maybe it's a quote that's commonly used by lots of people. But there's this idea that, and I think it's from the Elm community is where I first saw it, this idea that use your types and your compiler to make invalid states impossible to compile. So basically what you're actually trying to do is you're trying to express using your type system that invalid states are just not possible. And by doing that, you actually protect yourself. You can't write code that'll actually try and make a state that's impossible. This is, of course, a sliding scale. Being able to do it 100% perfectly is, sort of a fool's errand, because it's going to take you a lot of time and effort to do that. So from that perspective, you never end up with a full 100%. But from that perspective, but if you try for that and try and do what's easy to do that and learn how to use that, then you'll get a long way. And that's sort of the process that Lila takes, is to try and make that sort of stuff happen. So we try and use the types themselves and the compilation to actually stop us from making mistakes that we would normally try and catch in a unit test. So from that perspective, testing takes a second seat from that, or a back seat to that. Okay, going back to here. So there should be a way to run bloop with some auto reload. So I'm going to look into that. That's not the right bloop. Let's look at this. So I wonder here if this, let's stop bloop manually. Let's try, Lila here. I wonder if this actually uses bloop somehow internally to do this with SBT. Because not having auto reload would be annoying as anything. I do read chat, user 0. Functional core imperative shell is the question. And I don't understand that question, so I can't answer it. Let's try this one. And let's go back to here. Save that. Let's go back to account. Let's see where this actually still goes. That still works. So I think that actually might work. I think I might actually be using Bloop directly in there, which is nice. And going back to here and reloading. That change did not actually work. So I'm not actually bothered with the change. I'm probably too dumb to make this change right now. So let's not bother with this one. I'm realizing I'm actually getting quite tired. But that's the basics of how you set up Bloop and get things set up. Command Lakin has been edited. Fun. And just looking at the chat. Yeah, and I'm going to lag a little bit in terms of reading chat because from that perspective, it's hard to do thinking things at the same time and actually pay attention to chat, especially when you're tired and haven't had enough coffee. Speaking of which, I think I have more coffee, so I'm actually going to pour myself some because it would be useful right now. Okay, I'm going to try and get through 2 more things in this stream. I'm only going to go for a max of 2 hours, so I have about 45 minutes left, give or take a few minutes. And the last 2 things I'm going to try and get through is I'm going to very quickly give you a tour of the Lichess codebase. Very high level, nothing in depth, just sort of give you sort of a starting point in terms of how to understand it. So the first directory to look into is this conf directory. And you'll notice there's an application conf at base.conf. So if I upload application.conf, open it, not upload it. And you'll notice that it's a format that I don't know the name of the actual format, but these are basically, and maybe I shouldn't open that on there. Yeah, just 2 seconds here. Just gonna quickly take care of something here. Okay, going back to conf. Where did this go actually? Why did it close? So application conf. You'll notice that the primary thing that's in here is this include base. And so what it actually does is it actually includes the base.conf, which is our sort of default just 2 seconds here. Default application and default configuration for the application. And rather than editing this file, which is actually in the repository, you edit the application one that I was showing you. And that application one, if we go back to it here really quickly, basically what it does is it imports base. So all of these are the default ones. And then it can override it here with specific values. So you basically can give it values you want to use. So if you want to change the ports or the domains, the socket domains, the asset domains, then you would override it here. So this is sort of the primary thing, the primary place we do the config. And that's not super interesting, but if you're running this in a in a VM or something like that, then you can change the way the networking works or something like that as well too. You shouldn't actually have to edit this to do much if you're just running if you're just doing a sorry, I lost my train of thought after I leaked some testing keys, which are apparently not very important. But you shouldn't have to do this much for just running it locally. The other important file in this conf directory is the routes file, which is the one I really wanted to show you. And this routes file is what maps URLs to Scala code. So each of these URLs is the URL that you get. It sort of uses a format here, which is basically literals, and then this would basically be some path component, which is mapped to a string. Or in this particular case, it's for some other stuff. All these are mapped to strings for the most part. But yeah, so it basically, number here. So like, here's another path component where it basically says, all right, this number can take an int, so it'll map it to an int. If that's not an int, it'll be a 404, and then to a string for the perf key. So this file is like urls.py in Django. It's like your routes in Ruby. It's sort of where you start from. This is the interesting part, is like you just want to sort of figure out where to go from here. So when you're loading a page here and you're like, okay, I want to fix a bug, and I'm trying to fix a bug on the Lichess TV page, which isn't going to work because I don't have any games, or on the Swiss tournaments page. So I want to fix a bug here. The first thing to do is to look in here and see if you can find /Swiss. So once you find /Swiss, you can say, okay, it supports Git, and there's this Swiss home, controller Swiss home. And I'm just going to take a quick break there before I show what Swiss home is and look at the chat. Which question is it? Yeah, user 000. Which question did you ask? Okay, going back to this. So the controllers are stored in the app directory under controllers. But in my editor, I can actually, in my Vim with metals running, I can actually use the go-to definition on these to jump directly from routes to the definition, but in this particular case you can't. But you find the Swiss file in here, so Swiss, and then there will be a home, def home. And so this is sort of your kicking off point to figure out where the code exists for that particular page. And the way Lichess is organized is that these routes or controllers that you have here, their primary responsibility is to translate HTTP requests into our internal Lila model requests. So basically, Lila has an internal concept of what is going on, and that internal concept knows nothing about HTTP or HTML or anything else like that. It's a domain-specific knowledge it's a domain-specific model for running Lichess. And so internally to that, you have things like games and users and Swiss tournaments and other tournaments and forum posts and forums and things for TV page and all this sort of stuff. And the job of the controller is to actually take an HTTP request and then turn it into and then sort of route it or map it to the appropriate request internally. And so you'll notice that this file, this controller, will import things. Like it'll import things from Lila Swiss.Swiss, which is a different directory, which I'll show you here in a few minutes. And then it'll also have some sort of injected dependencies here, which is basically just some stuff that you have available to you that's injected appropriately. And so you notice that like home basically is just like maps to an open, which is just sort of open is, as I recall, just a very simple handler. So we have a bunch of different helpful Lila controllers this goes in Lila controllers, which is right here. So this Lila controllers is a bunch of helpful reusable stuff, which deals with a bunch of stuff for you. Like you can force no caching if you don't want the particular page to be caching. You can open as a simple sort of, there's a bunch of different simple things that sort of deal with various patterns that we use throughout the code base. And this is where, again, we're going to get to the limit of my Scala knowledge to do on stream. I can figure out what this stuff does given enough time, but trying to figure it out on stream is probably going to be a little too much. But there's just various type of things here, including stuff like anonymous or scoped or auth or scoped, or this requires auth. This requires auth and returns a body. This one's secure, yada, yada, yada. So there's just a bunch of helpers there that you'll see being used throughout. So if you're adding a new route, you'll need to understand that, and you'll need to figure this out. And the idea here is that in this one particular case, it takes an implicit context, which is of type context, which again, sometimes you don't know where that comes from, so you right-click, go to definition. And it turns out Leela has a context, which is a wrapper, which gives you information about the user, it gives you information about the page, the current language, and a bunch of other things like their current theme, preferences, stuff like that. And in this case, it's going to look at the user ID to figure out whether or not it should do something specifically or not. So I believe that the Swiss tournament feature only shows you tournaments from teams that you're actually part of. And so from that perspective, it's trying to basically just figure out whether or not it has any teams that it can query, or whether or not it can just show you sort of the base simple home. And so that's kind of what this does, basically. Looks at your team ID list, tries to figure out, and then figures out what tournaments are there, and then maps that to the appropriate home view. And I'll go through this a little bit more, and we'll talk about this specific piece here, which is not raw Scala. It's actually something called a Leelaism or Lilaism. And the other thing to know about this sort of app layout here is, in addition to these controllers in the app directory, we also have views. And views are basically where we get all of our HTML from. So a lot of the HTML in Leela, it uses, what is it, Twix? I forget the actual name of the library it uses, but it uses a Scala library for doing HTML. So basically it allows us to do things like, basically there's a div type function in here, and you can set attributes to that div, and then it can contain various H1s. And this actually looks very similar if you've used Vue or React or things like that. It looks very similar to how those work as well, but it's full Scala. And so these are just basically little snippets of HTML in the form of functions that you can use to do various aspects of it. And that's where all the sort of the HTML lives. And so from that perspective, Leela is organized in such a way that some of the code is just like a traditional web app where there's a request that goes to the server creates the HTML in memory, and then it returns that HTML, and then from that perspective, it returns that HTML, and then that page actually gets rendered. Some of the other pages though, some of the stuff that's live, like the game board and other things like that, that actually gets used a little bit more with the sort of reactive style development where data comes from the server in the form of just data, and then the HTML is changed and updated on the fly live. Okay, so that's the basic idea of the routes and the templates that we use. So I'm going to take a quick break here to quickly talk about this Leelaisms thing. So there's a bunch of shortcut syntax that Thibaut has developed over his time working on Leela, and they are listed on the wiki on the GitHub repository. If you scroll down to where did it go? Leelaisms. So this page is quite useful, and if you're someone who's used to Scala but not used to Leela, then this page will be probably fairly important. If you're someone who's not used to Scala and not used to Leela, then this page and your Scala docs and the CATS docs will be very important, because you'll have to spend a lot of time figuring it out. So one of the things that we have down here is some code golf style things that Lichess that Thibaut likes to do. They're not required in terms of your ability. You don't have to use these in your own code, but when you're looking at Lichess code, you may want to use them, or you'll want to understand them so you can understand the code. So this one's actually quite useful. This .pp basically means print and pass. So effectively, whenever you have a value in Lichess, and because Lichess is coded in a sort of functional way, you don't typically have a lot of imperative lines of code, one right after another. Sometimes it can be annoying if you want to debug something to be able to actually print it out. So in this particular case, you can do things like this sort of line here, which is basically like you're saying, I want to print out the player object, which is what this does, and it returns the player object as well, so that I can then call a method on it, and then I'm going to pass it this move parameter, but I also want to print the move parameter, so I'm going to call .pp, and then I'm going to print the result of that. So this line from a functional, not a functional perspective, from an implementation perspective, has the same effect as this line, except that it also printed three values. It printed the player, the move, and the result of player.makeMove. So this is super useful when you're trying to figure out how code works and you want to trace through it. You can add this sort of stuff in or use a debugger. So that's a super useful aspect that you can make use of. And there's a couple other ones which sometimes the result that you have is a future. So Leela makes heavy use of futures as well too, which I'm not going to go in depth about explaining exactly how those work, but basically it's the anything that has a database value or needs time to calculate sort of happens in the background. That you get a future as a response instead of the actual value, and the idea is that at some point in time this value will be available, but not now. And for those, there's also a then PP, which acts the same as this. So you'll see these are a lot throughout the code, and they're just basically shorthand for future of type A and future of a unit with nothing unit, just F unit and FUA. And similarly, there's a bunch of shortcuts with the various aspects of futures because we deal with them so much. There's success, few fail with this type, and funit, which are apparently incredibly hard to pronounce. There's also a few helper functions for comparing like at most and at least, just making sure that things are within a particular range, clamping things. And then some other option functions that you can use, etc. This is the one I was looking for here, which is an interesting one, and I'm not going to go into depth about how it works, but the basic idea is that it will take some value, say like a maybe int, and then it folds it into its default value, whatever the default value is for an int, so 0, and then calls this function on it. And the idea is that basically, if you have something which is optional, then you can call this function and you'll either have the value that it held or you'll have a default value for it. And so that's sort of a shortcut for that. And there's some more here. I'm not going to go through them all. You can read them all in your own time. But that's what this does. So this user, if I hover over this, is an optional string for the user ID. And basically it's saying that if I have a user, then I will either get empty string as a default, or I'll get the actual user ID string, and then we'll call this particular method, which if I right click and go to definition, we can open that. And so this cached Scala is in the Leela modules. So if you look up here, it's probably hard to read because it's a little bit, I'll just show you that it's in Leela modules team. And so that brings me to the sort of the next aspect of the way the code is organized. Thibaut's in chat today and answering some questions about the it's about the interesting. Well, I mean, it's still like the point I was trying to make about default is that hello. The point I was trying to make about default is the fact that basically you have a function which requires a string in that particular case, which is the underscore dot size, and user ID is an option string, and so the question basically calls dot size either on the string that was contained in the option or on the default empty string. Is that not correct? Am I out to lunch with that? And so yes, the resulting dot size is going to be 0 or some other size. So the resulting result of all of that is that you get something else out the other end, but it allows you not correct. Okay, interesting. I misunderstood that completely then. I mean, I'm going to have a little bit of an argument with Thibaut about this. So maybe int fold. So it calls f first. The idea is it calls f first, and if f doesn't return anything, then 0 gets the value at the end. Is that what you're saying? And not the other way around? Lakin is streaming right now. And okay, he'll update the doc to make it more clear. We'll come back to it when he's finished updating it, and I'll see where my misunderstanding came from. Thought I understood these, but apparently I don't. So the idea is that if we don't have an int, then the default value of whatever this would return is what we use. Understood. Okay. So the idea is not that we actually make a default value and call this function. So going back to here, so this function won't get called if we don't have a user ID. That's the idea behind it. I understand. So this function won't get called if we don't have a user ID. It will be called if we do have a user ID. And if we do have a user ID, we get the return value from this function, which will be a future of type list of strings. If we don't have a user ID, the function is not called, then we get a default empty list. There we go. Now I have hopefully successfully unconfused the legion of Leela acolytes that are trying to learn how to program in Leela through my bumbling today. Okay, there's Leela-isms. They're used throughout the code. You're confused again? Something pretentious? I think that's a kappa at the end. Hopefully people are actually unconfused. So basically, this is a function that we want to call if we have a user ID. So if we're logged in and we have a user ID, we want to get the teams list. But sometimes we won't have a user ID. So what this does, it basically says that we'll call it if we do, we won't call it if we don't, and if we don't, we'll return an empty list. Makes sense. Then we'll do flat map, and we'll leave flat map for a future discussion, not today. Okay, the thing I wanted to talk about next was the idea that these controllers are about translating the HTML or HTTP requests into the appropriate spot in the Leela module or internal model. And the Leela module or internal model is in the modules directory. So in the modules directory, we have a nicely organized decoupled is probably the right term, but a decoupled set of modules. Sometimes there's coupling in there for sure too, but it's very nicely organized, and each thing sort of has a nice purpose, and it has its own domain specific sort of setup. If we scroll down here, we'll find one for Swiss. If we go down far enough, we'll actually find the environment.scala, and this environment is basically, whenever we're dealing with this model, we basically want to have these sorts of things available. So whenever we're dealing with Swiss models, we want to be able to access the game repository, the user repository. We want to know when games start. We need to deal with remote sockets. We need to deal with chat. We need to deal with all these different things in here. And that's what the sort of environment module acts like, is it's just sort of a nice dependency injected way of getting access to the various dependencies of this module. We also typically have a model.scala, which is these sort of domain-specific type-safe objects that are used within this particular module. And so you'll see these being used throughout. And then there will be a number of different other files in here which represent different aspects of it, but there's almost always this one thing called Swiss API in the case of Swiss, or if we look in study, there will be a study API, which you see down here. And this API is basically, the idea behind this API is this is sort of the external API that's exposed to the other pieces of code that want to use this. So if we go back really quickly to the Swiss controller, this Swiss here is a Swiss env, which gives you access to the env, and you'll also notice that there's the Swiss API. So the Swiss API is basically a set of functions for dealing with things to do with Swiss tournaments. And so basically the job of this controller is to translate those HTTP requests into appropriate function calls within that API. So there's a nice dependency separation there in terms of the way it works. So inside of the API, you just deal with your domain-specific knowledge about the models and the type safety and exactly what you want to deal with, and the actual appropriate state transition is a bad term, appropriate function calls and things like that you need to do to actually provide the feature. And the controller is what actually translates that from HTTP into those calls. And then from this, let's go back to Swiss API. From the Swiss API, there will be a number of different things in here. Like there's a function for creating a Swiss tournament, which takes the data from a Swiss form, a particular user and a team, and then does what it needs to do in terms of mapping that all into various things and inserting it into the database. This is a function for updating a Swiss tournament, same sort of thing. This is a function for scheduling the next round of a Swiss tournament. For verdicts, for joining a Swiss tournament, for the game source, and it goes on and on and on here. And the idea is this API represents how we run Swiss tournaments internally with Lichess. And so from that perspective, that was the the idea that I was trying to get across there is this sort of, you can start from the routes. So if we go back to conf, you can start from routes. This gets you access to which controller is being used, so you can figure out which controller is being used. You can then go to the app controllers, find that controller, and from those there will be a particular module that will be imported and used, sometimes more than one, and then you can find your code in there. And that's sort of how you start digging down through the code to get to everything you need to write in Scala and on Lichess. Do I know that I am on the wrong site? Is that the question? All right, that was the sort of just a very basic, high-level, somewhat confusing, unfortunately, I apologize for that, but high-level introduction to the organization of the code within Lila. And I'm going to do one more quick thing before I call this stream over, because I'm starting to get even more tired, and I'm probably going to confuse more people at the end of this than I normally would, which is the code that's in UE. So top level directory here is UE. And in here, this is where we store all of our CSS, TypeScript, and what was the other thing I was going to say here? I think it's mostly CSS and TypeScript. Yeah. And each of these, again, is organized into a very similar set of directories, similar to the modules, and they're organized very nicely that way. And I'm actually going to take you through how they sort of work. And if you recall correctly, last time when we were here, we actually ran this command called UE/build. And this UE/build command runs a sort of complete build from start to finish of all of the UE repositories. If I run that really quickly, you'll notice that it starts running, and it actually is running. So this is building UE tree, UE cval, UE chess. So it builds each of them sort of individually, and it builds them in parallel, and it's going by really fast because I have quite a few cores, so it's using them all. But it sort of does a complete build from start to finish of this. So one of the questions we often get from new users is how to sort of partially compile or only build one particular aspect for this. So I'm going to talk about that just very quickly and give you a quick tour of those commands. So if you want to look at the UE build command, the UE build command is actually fairly easy to follow. You can see the various apps. It sort of has a dependency level of which ones it go, various plugins. It basically just goes through, ensures that we have the dependencies by yarn, and then does some building of them in order. So it's actually not too hard to look at this to try and figure it out. So if you're trying to understand how this all works, studying this it can be actually a decent way to quickly understand how it works. But if we go into UE here, one command we can actually run here, if you do an ls, there is where did it go? Gulp file. And so gulp is a toolkit to automate and enhance your workflow. So gulp is basically a way to basically deal with all of your different assets and source control, like your TypeScript or JavaScript. We don't have much JavaScript left. And CSS and things like that. It basically pulls it all in, does some build commands. And so this gulp file, if I look at it here, will have, at the top level one, has a bunch of different gulp tasks. So these are dependencies. Actually, let me put it in a code editor so we get highlighting. So these are dependencies of the file, various options. This is the destination, which is where the resulting build is going to go. This is the input. And so basically there's a few different commands. There's a build command. And there's also some other commands here as well too. So these gulp tasks are sort of gulp commands that you can run. CSS being one of them, CSS dev, CSS prod being the other two, and that's primarily it. But the point here is this CSS command is a command that I can actually run with gulp. So in here I can type in gulp space CSS. And when I do that, it's actually going to use the gulp file and start using a few tasks. And in this particular case, what it does is the CSS command will create some themed builds, and then it sets to watching as well too. And what this set watching means, it means that when I am editing the code for the CSS in one of these, let's say this one, let's say I just delete stuff because I don't know how to write CSS anyways, and save it, go back here, it'll have noticed that it's actually changed and rebuilt it. So this is basically how you can wash your CSS when you're hacking on the CSS. So if you're going to try and do an issue that requires you to change the design, using this gulp CSS command inside of the UE directory is sort of the right way to do that, because then you can hack away, it'll automatically reload, and then you can go back and you can reload the page to see what actually happened on that particular page. And if you set up you can set up some browser plugins to watch certain directories, which will automatically reload the CSS when it changes as well too, which means you can sort of have a really nice workflow where you change the code, it automatically recompiles, and your browser automatically reloads it, which I would recommend. Okay, so that's how you build the CSS stuff. For TypeScript, if you want to watch some of the TypeScript stuff, we have to do that on a per module basis, but that's okay because usually you're only working in one particular module. Like let's say we were working on studies. Study one in here, I thought it was. No, let's say we're working on puzzles then. So we go into puzzle. And when you get into this puzzle, you'll notice that this puzzle is actually its own little sort of project by itself. It's got its own little package.json, which tells you the dependencies for it. It's got its own rollup config, because we use rollup to package up the final JSON. It's got its own TypeScript config. And it's got CSS, and source will have the TypeScript in it. So the same thing in here. And as well, it doesn't actually use gulp directly from here. We actually use just basically, so if I go to package.json, you'll notice that they'll have some scripts in here. So we have some scripts down here for dev and for prod. And so to run these scripts, we're actually going to use yarn because that's what we use. So yarn run dev. This dev piece here is the command from package.json. And the -w just means we want to watch this file. So this will do a similar thing where it'll start the process of compiling. And then once it's finished, it'll produce the output that we need. And if I go back here, and this was not the CLI anymore, this was puzzle source. Edit this. And we add some new feature to ops. We save it. We go back, it'll actually recompile it for us automatically. So if you're hacking away on the TypeScript and you want to actually just automatically compile stuff, again, this is a good way to do that. Okay, that was the primary stuff that I wanted to talk about today. So that was sort of an attempt to go from where we left off last time, which was the basic setup, you have things running, to a very quick introduction to the way the code is organized, to get autocomplete working, to get your editor all working and stuff like that. And I chose to do it in Visual Studio because I figured that it might actually be more helpful to most people than using Vim. Using Bloop and using metals for Scala means you can actually set it up in Vim as well too. So if you're a Vim hacker, then you can use that. And with that, I am going to give a few minutes here for people if they have questions. And I'd be happy to answer them. I won't be playing anybody on stream right now, both because that's somewhat confusing in the stream that way, and also because my chess brain is completely shut, just like my coding brain right now. I did not create this. I have written some small amount of code for it, and I've done other things for this project, but I did not create it. Thibaut was the one who started it, and then many people have contributed since then. So it would be hard to list everybody who's contributed, but lots of people have. "4 hours of source code read by a bot." Lucas says he's in. Someone says this calls for what kind of stream? That calls for a third stream when we actually get to see code. I'm just making sure I haven't missed any other important questions here. Scala is, I covered this a few different times, but the reason why we use Scala is for numerous reasons. It's built on the JVM, so we get a production-tested, battle-tested, very efficient virtual machine to run our code on. And specifically, this virtual machine is actually very good at dealing with lots of small objects that get created and deleted with the garbage collection. And the reason why that's important is because we use a sort of a functional style, and functional is an interesting term. We use sort of an immutable style of programming where we try and keep things types both extremely type safe, as well as we try and keep things immutable, which means we don't change them underneath people, so things are copies of things. And when you use that sort of functional programming, immutability, type safety, type style, which Scala is very good at, then you end up creating a bunch of small objects that you use just very temporarily, very quickly. And the JVM is very good at doing that and then cleaning up after itself. So for that reason, Scala makes a lot of sense as the backend server. In addition, Scala is a nice language which provides you with a ton of interesting features. I'm not going to go through those specifically, but those features allow for a high level of developer productivity, which Thibault makes use of, and as well as the fact that it also has the play network and the play framework, and Akka specifically allows us to do some interesting thing with sort of the actor model, which allows us to send messages back and forth, which allows us to do nice, efficient asynchronous programming. So from that perspective, Scala actually makes a lot of sense. And Thibault has told me a number of times that if he had to make the same decision again, he'd probably still choose Scala even currently today, even though that choice was made quite a few years ago. I'm not even sure Elixir was a thing when Lichess started in Scala, honestly. I mean, I know Elixir's not that young, but as well, it was not like Elixir sort of rose to popularity in the recent years. So my understanding is Elixir wasn't quite as popular or as well known when the project was initially started. So I don't even think it was probably even considered, to be honest with you. As well as the fact that Elixir is based off of Elixir is the name of the language, right? It's an interesting language. I'm not going to get into that, to putting it down. It's a good language. It's interesting. I'd like to learn it. I don't know it, but it wasn't, I don't think even considered at the time. I think Haskell was considered, though, as well. And Thibault was coming from PHP, so he was looking for something quite a bit different. And Scala and JVM, the speed that you get out of the raw speed you get at the end is very useful. I don't think Lichess would be where it is today if we didn't have that anymore, So from that perspective, I don't know how Elixir compares from a pure raw speed perspective, but I suspect, knowing the developers that we have, that if for some reason we decided Scala was no longer the correct choice, which I don't think is true, I think it is the correct choice right now, if only from a developer productivity perspective. But if Scala somehow for some reason was not the correct choice, I think the first language we'd probably look at is Rust, to be quite honest with you. Although I don't think Rust is quite the right language either. So but that would definitely be high up on the list in terms of stuff that we would evaluate. And yeah, we use Scala for asynchronous programming, correct? How do you change languages? When you're programming, you just open an editor, start a new file, make it the new language. Or someone asking about something on Twitch in terms of what translate you want, I see. I have no idea what that question about changing languages was about. Any other questions today? I'm glad someone thinks that your stream was great. I don't feel like I was on top of my game as much as I was the last one. I feel like there was a lot more ums and sort of me staring blankly at the screen, but hopefully it was useful, and hopefully this actually provides some amount of help to people who are trying to get set up in programming. And it doesn't look like we have a ton of different questions right now, so I think I'll probably... The ums give confidence that we can do it too. Well, if I can, this is very true. If I can do it, you can do it too. That is certainly true. What's my favorite movie? That's a good question. I would have a long time ago said Usual Suspects, but I don't think that's a politically correct answer anymore, considering the accusations that have been leveled at the top actor in it. But I don't actually watch many movies, to be quite honest with you. I can't even remember the last one I watched. It was a really bad one. Actually, I've watched most of the Fast and Furious, surprisingly. I don't know if I've seen 8 specifically. I've watched a few, I should say, not most. A few. But yeah, movies are not my thing. I much prefer coding and losing at chess. Nah, let's not switch Twitch topic to movies. I'm not going to answer any more movies questions. All right, I think I'm going to wind it down now. Thank you all for showing up. Hopefully it was useful, and I'll probably do another one at some point in time, although I'm going to wait for a little bit longer. So I'm probably going to wait a few more weeks, so it won't be next week, it won't be 2 weeks away. And the reason why will just be to give me some time to sort of plan it out a bit better, to understand exactly what I'm going to cover and to sort of get a plan for that. I think the next one might actually be something where I actually try and fix some bug on stream. So I'll pick some issue and I'll go through fixing it, and maybe we'll do two of them, one for the sort of front end and one for the back end, and work through that. Thanks for sticking around. Have a great day.